Getting into challenging group content in Guild Wars 2 shouldn't be hard because there are very few prerequisites and all classes are viable. However, there are other player expectations and misinformation about how much effort is required to perform, which can cause unnecessary trouble. In response to this, there have been many attempts to tailor playstyles for players who are new, unconfident, or aren't looking to exert much effort. These low-intensity playstyles are designed to minimize actions per minute. For example, here's a Revenant build where you mainly auto-attack for damage. Just swap Legend Stance whenever you get low on energy, and then press the one upkeep skill that gives you more damage. The rest is passives, and you let your auto-attack go. The issue with this is that if you're just auto-attacking on a Revenant, you aren't doing much besides a decent amount of damage. If you're in a raid and you can just sit there and auto-attack, then it doesn't matter what you do. But in most situations, you will need to move and do mechanics and burst damage during a small window of time, or stick to a boss who is moving. A build which is really good at auto-attacking a DPS golem is not necessarily going to be as effective or convenient in a real situation. This is why ranged builds are often the easiest to play. They require less movement, and movement requires a lot of actions and skill to perfect, which can be added to the skill rotations of any build. The other day I hurt my wrist and I couldn't use my mouse as much, which really limits your movement. So I just dealt with it by using only the most important skills and moving with targeted ports to minimize how much work I need to do, and I was fine. Reducing the amount of work you do is less so about what build you play and more about customizing your setup to what build you are playing. If you're in a group, there are plenty of other things your group needs like support and CC. If your role in a group is to do damage and you're doing less damage than someone who is doing damage but also providing boons, you're not really performing well in your role. But that's fine because you don't need to perform that well to complete an encounter. These simple to play builds that are selfishly oriented really aren't going to increase your odds of winning because you'll often fail to mechanics more than you'll fail to lacking DPS. It isn't a build that can do damage easily that you want, it's a build that can survive easily and a build that can support its allies. Here's another issue with designing these builds with minimal inputs. People will say that it's nice to use a build that is low actions per minute because they have physical limitations preventing them from performing on harder to play builds. But in the end, if you want to join a group, then people are going to look for a specific thing to fill that role. If you're running some niche build designed to keep your spot on a damage meter afloat and nothing else, then you aren't increasing your odds of success or creating a situation to learn from, you just want to find a place you can get carried. The reality is that there are meta builds that are extremely easy to play and will require very minimal inputs while still giving you plenty of survivability and team support or CC. And here's the thing, if you can't perform these builds to their full potential, that's fine too, because you can focus on using the more valuable skills and skip some of the filler skills, which will give you comparable results for much less input. Rather than letting other people label you as a disabled person because you're running a low intensity and low impact build, you can just run a powerful build that is also simple to play. You can find any of the following builds listed on guildgen.com in the raid build section. These are common archetypes, so you won't stand out because you're different, you'll fit in because you're valuable. Here are 9 builds for each class, listed in the order of best builds in terms of balancing how useful it is to your team against how much effort is put into it to get that value. So first, we will go over by far the easiest build you can play, and it's the Power Alacrity Renegade. Naturally, this build is easy to play because it is harmful to mash your buttons, because you need to manage your energy and be conservative with which skills you use. To provide value to your team, you just need to hit your F4 off cooldown and swap Legend Stances off cooldown, and then you could auto attack and be pretty fine. From there you could add in your Sword 2 when you can. When in Calistance, use Ice Razor's Ire or Channel the Elite, and that's just one key press for a good amount of damage. If you need CC, there is the Staff 5 on Weapon Swap, which is a huge value to your team if you CC when it's needed. Even though this is a melee build, which is inherently harder than a range build, you can use the Sword 5 to port yourself towards the target and minimize movement input. And there's plenty of support you can provide to your team for improving your odds of success. The next easiest build is actually a conditioned Spectre Thief build. The reason for this is not only because you have range damage, but most of your damage is from one skill, the Scepter 3. But you can't just keep spamming this because you'll run out of initiative. It's not to say that the build has a low skill cap, but when you can just dump your initiative and then worry about other things, it makes the build very convenient in real situations. It also provides great support to allies just by going into Shroud, and it's possible to run a variant that provides alacrity to allies in between your initiative dumps. However, placing wells on the ground might be a bit inconvenient, so here's a nice trick to always place your wells at your feet. If your mouse cursor is over your user interface, you will automatically place ground targeted skills at your feet. So if you just hover your mouse cursor over your minimap, then use your wells when stacked with your group, you won't need to worry about mouse movement. Likewise, if you're a skill clicker, it has the same effect, so this build is actually great for skill clickers. Necromancers are one of the easiest classes because of how tanky they are. This Reaper build might be melee, but it spends most of its time in Reaper Shroud, which means that all damage will not hit your actual health bar. This means that this build is the safest build to play. While it does not provide direct buffs to its allies, it does provide benefits to the squad with wide cleaving AoE, pulling enemies together, lots of CC, and boon removal, which are just as valuable in certain situations. If you want ranged damage, you can use your axe, but you could just camp Greatsword most of the time because you'll be in Shroud anyways, and the auto attack and force skill are where you get your damage in Shroud. A very underrated build is the Alacrity Staff Condition Mirage. Not only does it dodge as part of its rotation, making you incidentally dodge mechanics, but it's also a ranged build which allows you to survive very easily. You do want to stay near your allies though, because you provide them alacrity and might when you use your staff ambush skill, which becomes available on your one skill after you dodge. Get your 3 clones out with the staff 2 and 3, and then dodging will give you and your clones access to ambush, which deals great damage over time. Next is a Sharpbow Conditioned Soul Beast. This one isn't very complex at all. Prioritize standing behind your target for the extra flanking bonuses, which is where you want to be anyways because it's the safest location most of the time on any boss. Use Shortbow 2 and 4, and otherwise auto attack. Use all your utility skills when you can, and that's pretty much it. It's super easy because you have ranged piercing damage, and your auto attack is often going to represent most of your damage anyways, and you can share stances which are nice for your teammates. A similar build to this is the Power Rifle Mechanist. Because your pet mech abilities can be turned on autocast by control right clicking them, it reduces the amount of actions needed by a lot. Then you just put on some signets and auto attack away from range with your rifle. You can forego grenades because they are rather spam intensive, but it would definitely be better to use grenade 2, 4, and 5 off cooldown. Next is a DPS Dragon Hunter, which is a burst oriented build. Not much auto attacking in this one, but it's very face roll friendly. So if you're not a fan of just spamming auto attacks because it can be boring, then this one's great for you. All you need to do is understand your burst combo, which involves using your tether on the main target to get a damage boost. Then use your pulsing damage abilities, and then your hard hitting greatsword abilities. This build has ranged options, and also brings lots of CC, and shares blocks to be useful to its allies. The Conditioned Berserker is definitely one of the easiest warrior builds because it has lots of ranged damage with the longbow and the sword primal burst, and it can also give lots of boons to its allies, including quickness with banners. The only issue is that the Berserker rotation requires lots of weapon swapping, which is not the easiest thing to get used to, but let me reiterate, this is still a relatively easy build that once you do get used to it, it flows so intuitively and feels great to play that you don't really have to think about it. Finally, we have the Elementalist. Known for being one of the hardest classes to play for beginners, we have here a build that is not only easy to play for Elementalist, but it also still teaches you the general mechanics of Elementalist, making it a great starting point to branch out into more difficult builds. This is the Conditioned Tempest. Your overloads are your most valuable skills, and since they are such long cast times, you have plenty of time to think about your next move. You can use signets for big damage with little animation, and then just rotate between the fire, earth, and air attunements to use their overloads to give alacrity to your allies. If necessary, you can also provide healing, even though it is mainly a DPS oriented build. So there you have it. With any of these builds, you can easily get into endgame PvE content in Guild Wars 2. If you think any of these builds doesn't do enough damage, well then maybe you need to try more difficult builds. Or maybe you need to understand that DPS doesn't win fights, support and mechanics does. But maybe that's a topic for another time. If this video helped you, consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. As always, I appreciate if you share my content because that helps too. And if you want to support me more directly, then you can become a patron. Thanks to those who do support me, any amount helps. And with that being said, good luck and enjoy your journey.